Hello, thank you for listening. My name is Arthur Penhaligon, and I want to tell you a story from a time when I was just 32 years old. Before the war, my world was a simple, tactile thing. It smelled of hot light and cheap newsprint. It was the rhythmic thunder of the printing presses on Fleet Street, a sound that felt like the very heartbeat of London. I was a journalist, you see, a writer. I believed with the earnest naivety of a young man that the world could be understood if you just arranged the facts correctly. Every event was a story, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It had characters, heroes, and villains, and a moral that could be neatly summarized in a headline. My job was to find that story, polish it until it shone with clarity, and deliver it to the world. I believed in the fundamental power of a verified source, a confirmed fact. The truth, I thought, was something you could hold in your hand. The war, of course, taught me otherwise. Took my simple belief and tore it into confetti, scattering it on the blood-soaked soil of Europe. They took my notepad and my press pass and gave me a different set of tools, a quiet lethality, a knack for languages, and a chameleon skin. I was still a journalist in a way. I was just filing my reports to a much smaller and far more lethal readership in Whitehall. People imagine the end of the war as a great, crashing crescendo, a final, triumphant chord. But for me, in the spring of 1945, it felt less like a conclusion and more like a story that the editor had completely lost control of. The pages were out of order, entire chapters were missing, and the ink was running on the final paragraph. And it was there, in the smudged, uncertain margins of history, that I stumbled upon the story that I would carry, unpublished, for the rest of my life. It began, as all my stories did, with the search for a source. The air in the town tasted of wet ash and defeat. It was a small, forgettable place in the Austrian Alps, a place that God and the Allied bombers had mostly overlooked. But it was here, amidst the gray, skeletal remains of the Reich, that the real ghosts were stirring. Not the spirits of the dead, but the very much alive spirits of the damned, all scrambling for a new life. My mission was simple on paper: identify and trace the burgeoning escape routes. The ratlines, we were beginning to call them. We knew high-ranking party officials were vanishing, melting away like snow in a sudden thaw, taking with them secrets, gold, and a complete absence of remorse. I was there to find the timetable for their departure. My cover was thin but serviceable, a Swiss journalist writing a piece on the resilience of the Austrian people. It gave me a reason to be in dismal little coffee houses, nursing a cup of bitter acorn water that masqueraded as coffee, listening. A spy's greatest weapon isn't a gun, it's his ears and his patience. I spent weeks nursing that patience, trading my scarce, real cigarettes for whispers and rumors. I was building a narrative, connecting the dots, looking for the one character who knew the plot. I found him in a man named Klaus. He wasn't a jackbooted fanatic. There was no fire in his eyes. He was a creature of paper and ink, a mid-level bureaucrat in the RSHA whose entire world had been built on rubber stamps and triplicate forms. His god was procedure. Now his god was dead and he was terrified. I didn't approach him with threats. I didn't need to. I approached him with the one thing he craved more than safety: a sympathetic ear, a chance to tell his story. We met in the back of a derelict bookstore. The irony was not lost on me. Surrounded by thousands of stories, most of them likely banned, we were about to write a new, secret one. The air was thick with the scent of decaying paper, a smell I once associated with the grand libraries of London, with knowledge and truth. Here, it just smelled of rot. Klaus's hands trembled as he lit the cigarette I offered him. His face was the color of old parchment. "They think it is an ending," he whispered, his German soft, conspiratorial. "They are wrong. It is a reorganization." I just nodded, letting the silence do the work. A journalist learns that people are terrified of silence. They rush to fill it, often with the very things they're trying to hide. "I kept the records," he said, his voice barely audible. "Someone had to, the schedules, the payments. The new identities, it was my job to ensure the paperwork was in order." He saw himself not as a conspirator, but as a diligent clerk, ensuring the trains ran on time, even if they were carrying the architects of genocide into comfortable retirement. He wanted a way out, a new life courtesy of the British. In exchange, he would give me his ledger, his life's work, the master guest list for the Devil's retirement party. I agreed. The exchange was to happen 2 nights later, in the crypt of a bombed-out church. The feeling, walking through the rubble-strewn streets to meet him, it was the familiar thrill I used to get just before a big story broke. The adrenaline, the certainty that I was about to hold a piece of the truth in my hands. I felt like the man I used to be, the man who believed a headline could change the world. The crypt was cold. A deep stone cold that felt ancient, eternal. It smelled of damp earth and snuffed-out candles. Klaus was already there, a frantic silhouette in the gloom. He didn't speak. He just pushed a heavy, leather-bound ledger into my hands and scuttled away into the darkness, a rat leaving the sinking ship he had so diligently helped build. I found a corner, took out my small torch, and opened the book. The beam cut a clean circle on the page, and there it was, everything I'd hoped for and more. Names I recognized from intelligence briefings, Gestapo chiefs, SS colonels, beside them destinations, Buenos Aires, Cairo, Madrid. Then bank account numbers in Switzerland and notes on new identities, an Argentinian cattle rancher, an Egyptian cotton merchant. It was the story of the year. The headline screamed in my mind, Nazi butchers flee justice. It was clean. It was simple, it was the story everyone wanted to read, and then my world tilted on its axis. My fingers, numb with cold, turned the page, and then another. Deeper in the ledger, the entries changed. They were more complex. Alongside the SS names, there were others. Coded designations I didn't recognize at first, and the payments weren't just in gold Reichsmarks or Swiss francs. The currency was different. Technical schematics, V2 guidance. Research notes, Sarin Gas. List of atomic physicists and locations. My breath caught in my throat. My thoughts, usually so ordered, so linear, became a frantic, tangled mess. This wasn't just an escape, it was a fire sale. They were selling off the Reich's intellectual property, piece by bloody piece, to the highest bidder, and then I saw it. A marginal note in Klaus's neat, pedantic script, a contact point for a transaction, a name, a Russian name. A name I knew, Colonel Ivan Morozov of the NKVD. I had seen his name in a briefing just a month before, one of our counterparts in the Soviet intelligence apparatus, a man we were supposed to be cooperating with. A man on our side. My blood ran cold, colder than the stone floor of the crypt. I stared at the name, at the entry beside it, delivery of jet engine blueprints. The simple, clean narrative I was holding shattered into a million pieces. The headline in my mind died. What was the new headline? Nazis and Soviets in secret tech deal. Who would believe it? Who would even want to believe it? The war wasn't over. The ink wasn't dry. And yet here in this ledger was the undeniable prologue to the next one. This wasn't about good versus evil anymore. This wasn't Allies versus Axis. This was a messy, cynical, transactional business, a liquidation. Our great crusade against fascism was ending, with our enemies selling their secrets to our allies, who were already preparing to become our new enemies. The whole monstrous, world-spanning conflict was resolving itself into a grubby back-alley deal. The sensory ghost of a Fleet Street pub hit me then, so powerfully it made me dizzy. I could almost smell the stale beer and pipe smoke, feel the warmth of the hearth, hear the boisterous laughter of my colleagues as we put the paper to bed. A world where things made sense, where the lines were clearly drawn. That world was 1,000 miles and a lifetime away. Here in the crypt there were only shades of gray, and the chilling realization that I was utterly, completely alone. Who could I trust with this? My superiors in London. They might bury it, classify it for 100 years to avoid destabilizing the alliance with Stalin. The Americans. They were running their own operations, scooping up scientists like rare stamps. The Soviets, that was a death sentence. Suddenly every shadow in the crypt felt like it held a watcher. German, Russian, British, American. The truth I held in my hands didn't make me powerful. It made me a target for everyone. My fear, that deep, gnawing fear that the truth I risked my life for would be manipulated or ignored, it was no longer a fear. It was a certainty. This story, the most important story I had ever uncovered, would never be printed. It couldn't be. The neatly structured world of my past was a lie. There was no editor. There was only chaos and competing, brutal narratives, each one fighting to become the accepted history. I closed the ledger. The sound echoed in the silence of the crypt. It felt like closing a coffin. The weight of it in my hands was immense. Not the physical weight of the paper and leather, but the crushing gravity of a truth too dangerous to tell. I spent the rest of my life as a writer. I wrote books, articles, historical analyses. But I never again felt that pure, uncomplicated conviction I once had on Fleet Street. That ledger, it became the ghost at my desk. A silent, unpublished manuscript that colored everything else I ever wrote. It taught me that history is not the first draft, but the final, approved, and heavily redacted one. The most important stories are the ones buried in the archives, locked in safes, whispered in crypts, and never brought into the light. The war didn't just teach me that men could be monstrous. It taught me that truth itself is not a fixed star to navigate by, but a flickering candle, easily shielded, easily redirected, and all too easily extinguished. I did my duty. I passed the ledger up the chain of command through a trusted channel. It vanished, of course, swallowed into the great, silent belly of the intelligence world. I never received a commendation for it. I never even received a confirmation that it had been received. It simply ceased to exist, and Klaus, my source, was found dead a week later. An unfortunate victim of post-war chaos, the official report said. I knew better. He was a loose thread, a footnote that needed to be erased. The hardest lesson is this. In war, you spend all your time learning to identify the enemy. You memorize their uniforms, their weapons, their language. The real test, the one that stays with you, is learning that in the great, messy story of the world, the lines between author, editor, and censor are hopelessly, terrifyingly blurred, and you are never quite sure which one you are supposed to be. This memory is a piece of shrapnel I carry. It's heavy. Help me carry it. Subscribe and ensure these stories are never left to rust in silence.